age recommendation, 16 plus, mature content, sensitive content. The second thing is, anytime you come to a workshop like this is something that I just kind of recommend in general. And that is that if you yourself are experiencing doubts, right? And obviously you don't have to raise your hand that I'm experiencing doubts, whatever it is. Then you have to come to this particular workshop in a certain kind of emotive predisposition. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, you don't want to superimpose emotive intellectual baggage. A lot of times what happens is people will come to a certain course or a certain workshop or attend a certain talk, and they'll come with not the idea that yes, I can change, or I want to change, or I can remove my doubts, but they'll come with, let's see what this guy has to offer and how I can outsmart him. If that's the position you're coming from, then this is not the workshop for you. So you have to have what we call epistemic humility. We'll get into what epistemology is in a little bit. But in other words, you have to have intellectual humility to say, you know what? It is possible that I can change. It is possible that I can move from a state of doubt to a state of certainty. All right? And that's more of a kind of a predisposition for you, a state where you have to start with. My fourth point there is a note on language. When you think about, let me see if I have this on the next slide. Okay. When you think about language, number one, so we've done this course like all over the US, we've done it actually all over the world, I don't even say all over the US. And one of the critiques about this course is that you guys use really hard words. Like you use epistemology and ontology and teleology and all these words. Why do you have to use such hard words? Why can't you just make it simple? Right? Is not the Quran has not come down in simple terms, right? And so on. Isn't this? So one of the things I wanted to mention here is that why do we do that? Why do we say, look, learn to use this terminology? It's because when you go out into the world, when you are exposed to ideas that are going to cause doubts, one of the ways in which doubts come in is not from the intellectual rigor of the one bringing the doubt. It's based on their ability to speak. They have not the intellectual advantage, because the kufr never will. They have the rhetorical advantage. Okay? And I'll give you an example to highlight this. Why rhetoric becomes really important. Okay? How many people have heard the term, I think I have a slide on this, but let me just, no, I don't. Okay. How many people have heard the phrase Bond, James Bond? Anybody? Everyone's heard it, right? So they say this was the most, emblematic phrase in all of cinematic history. I think there's some hyperbole there, that's a bit exaggerated. But the thing is, if you really think about this phrase, what makes it good? What makes it amazing? I mean, the guy just came in and told you his name. He could have said it in so many different ways. He could have said, all right, first name James, last name Bond. He could have said, hi, my name is James Bond. But something, the way he just comes in, there's some sort of style, some sort of pizzazz. It just kind of, Bond, James Bond, something about it. There's a ring. And in fact, this particular phrase is a very well-known rhetorical device in the English language. It's called a diacope. It's on the pattern of A, B, A. And you've heard other phrases perhaps, right? Burn, baby, burn. Home, sweet home. Bond, James Bond. Now the thing is, back in the olden times, and I'm talking here about when people used to read Shakespeare and stuff like that, they would teach this as a science. Like rhetoric would be taught. For us, the science of balagha would be a kind of a parallel in a sense. But to understand that words and arguments are not just about the substance of the argument, but about how it's presented. And so your choice of words is as important as the argument you're making. When you have a young person that goes to college and they go into whatever, they go into, evolutionary biology, 300 or whatever the name of the class is, and the professor stands up there and he's using terms that make him sound really smart, and then my man comes to the masjid and the imam is just using very simple terminology, even though the imam, what he's saying may be correct. What is going on inside the mind of that young person? Well, that guy is very smart, he's very intelligent, he's very erudite, right? If you do not come with the same usage of the language, you're already you already started from a negative position, right? So that's why we're saying understand the terms we're using, and we'll define those terms. And your usage of those terms will do nothing except empower you, bi'idhnillah. Okay? So that was my quick spiel about that. A couple of things. I mentioned difficult terms. I talked about the para-rhetoric. I'm going to skip over trigger warning. Hopefully we've gotten past that. All right, so let us start in earnest. I have a whole bunch of, let's say, ideologies up there. So I want us to go through these, and I'd like you to tell me what each one of these is. Right? So let's start with atheism. This is probably the easiest one. What is atheism? Yep. What is atheism?
People who don't believe there's a God.
Good. People that don't believe there's a God. Okay. Let's move on to liberalism. What is liberalism? Really? You're going to tell me what liberal? Okay, bismillah.
People who are freedom. No.
Okay. No. That's good. That's good. So people that believe in freedom as an absolute ethic. But we'll get into that a bit later. Okay. Anyone want to add to that? What is liberalism? Everyone know the difference between liberalism and liberal versus conservative? You guys know the difference, right? Okay. So here's the thing. Liberalism, very quickly, is an ideology. It's a worldview. Both what we call in the US liberals and conservatives both fall under liberalism as a worldview. They just have a different interpretation of how liberalism, or a different understanding of how it should be applied. When we talk about liberalism, as the young man here mentioned, we're talking about concepts like freedom, equality, rights, and so on. The challenge with liberalism, however, is that there is no, which we'll get into a little bit later, no grounding for those concepts. So we say freedom is absolute in a sense, and so their freedom is an absolute ethic. And that therefore we should strive for that. We should spread that all over the world. Even if they don't want it, we'll shove it down their throats, right? So liberalism is a worldview that both liberals and conservatives agree with. Now, how they interpret it is a bit different. So with conservatives, when they talk about liberalism, they believe that human beings should extend freedom as far as possible. So therefore, when it comes to the world around us, we should be able to take a hold of natural resources to increase our freedom as much as we want. So that's why they talk about things like free market economics and things like that. Conservatives. Liberals, on the other hand, what we call liberals, what may be a better use is progressives. So I'm going to start using that instead of liberals, but we understand, right, left, conservatives, progressives. Progressives, have this more or less, the idea of expanding freedom to everyone. But in addition to that, they say not only is the natural world able to be, our freedom shouldn't extend not only into the natural world, but even in the biological reality that we have. So a progressive could say, yes, I'm free, not only free from, let's say, natural resources that I can overcome, but why should biology even dictate my freedom? So therefore you can get into concepts like, well, if I don't want to be a man, I don't have to be a man, or whatever, right? All that stuff. That's progressives. Another way of understanding it, very briefly, conservatives want to conserve the past, right? Not everything in the past. They don't want to conserve things like slavery and stuff like that, but general family values, and so that's why they're called conservatives. Progressives are always on this upward trajectory that progress can happen. So yes, we say that technological progress can happen. We can say intellectual progress can happen, but where we may differ is we don't believe in moral progression. And they say the time period that you live in determines what is moral and what is immoral. Just simply when you exist. And that's why even the rhetoric, the words that are used, that are part and part of our culture almost, down to the very core. When you say, even when you think about talking to your parents, oh, those are old ideas. Oh, you guys used to do that back in the day, right? Now things are different, Dad, whatever. Even within our language, whereas if you go to let's say the pre-modern Islamic world, the concept of time dictating what is moral and immoral wasn't a thing. It's only now we say we exist in this time. If we move to the future, it means this is moral, this is no longer moral. It's just a shift in time. It's a temporal shift. But that has no foundations. Because what that means is there's no such thing as objective or absolute morals, or let's say objective morals, because it's always based on time. You know, it's interesting, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tasubbu dar, fa inna Allaha huwa dar," right? Like, do not curse time, for indeed Allah is dahr. Anyways, so I'm not going to get too far into that. So liberalism, understand it's a worldview. It's not just simply liberals versus conservatives. Okay? Everyone clear about liberalism? All right, transgenderism. What's that? Yes, this is the most vocal table here. Y'all should be ashamed of yourself. All right, yes.
Transgenderism is mostly talking about one of the things in LGBTQ.
Sure, okay. One of the letters in the LGBTQ, A, B, D, Z, Y, whatever, wherever they're going to go to, right? Yes. Specifically, what is it? Who can tell me? Yeah.
These people believe that gender is separated from biological sex and that it exists in a spectrum.
Sure.
And then you can choose, based on liberalism, where
Great.
spectrum you decide to be, regardless of the biology.
Bizabt. Exactly.
And I think there's something called transhumanism that is in charge of transgenderism.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. This is something else, but alhamdulillah. All right, so everyone clear on what that is, transgenderism? I think that's pretty straightforward. I mean, you guys live in California, you should know this. Anyway, postmodernism. Who's in school? Who's in college? Okay. All right, all of you should know what postmodernism is. What is it? What are we talking about postmodernism? What is if we look at the etymology of the word, the breakdown of the word, what do you think it means? Just based on postmodernism, what do you think that means?
After the modern.
Right, what comes after modernism, right? So postmodernists, there's a few things that kind of tie them together, but essentially what they're saying is that the modern world brought certain concepts and certain knowledge claims, right? And those are based in concepts that we find in the Enlightenment. So the idea of science being an arbitrator for us to understand truth and falsehood. They say, no. That's all basically the white man's game. They have epistemes that they've now taken over. They've had these knowledge that they've taken over, and we want to free ourselves from that. So we're not going to have a hierarchy of this kind of, scientific knowledge or knowledge based on the material world. Our knowledge of what we have as a hierarchy would be based on your experience. And so therefore, you, having experienced something, are the only person that can say something about whatever that particular phenomena is. And there's a hierarchy, right? So if you are a white male, you're way at the bottom of this hierarchy. Okay? You're like last, right? But if you happen to be a female, you've now raised up in this hierarchy, right? Now you have more of a right to speak about topics than a white male. If you are a black female, now you have levels, right? You can overlap a few things. Now you move up on the hierarchy. And this hierarchy keeps on going. So if you're a black, female, lesbian, now you're up on the, and so it keeps on going up. The issues with postmodernism, this is not a class on postmodernism, but the issues is that there are certain philosophical foundations which are very problematic. Number one, the claim that the truth itself is relative. This becomes very problematic because it's a self-defeating claim. If the truth is relative, then that particular statement is also relative, and therefore there's nowhere you can go. Okay? But anyways, briefly, postmodernism. Nihilism. What's that? Or nihilism. Depends on if you're a Brit or you're an American. Nobody knows what nihilism is? The basic belief, like, okay, that God doesn't exist and therefore all of life is just meaningless. It has no meaning. And so a lot of nihilists, they love the concept of suicide, right? Because they say, well, it's just all meaningless. If we're all just a bunch of, atoms whizzing around, and you move from one state, which is life, to another state, which is death, and it's just a reconfiguration of carbon, so it's all just meaningless. So why are we even here? So that's nihilism. Feminism. Yeah.
Feminism is the ideology of women believing that their status is higher than a male.
Okay, so women believing that their status is higher than a male or equal to a male? Well, I guess it depends on who you ask, right? So it depends. But okay, more or less is about, let's say, women's rights. right? We'll leave it there because I have another slide on that. What about Buchanism? Who knows what that is? Raise your hands. But first of all, who knows what feminism is? Raise your hands. Okay, who knows what, let's go through the list. Who knows what atheism is? Raise your hands. Okay, who knows what liberalism is? We just went through it. Who knows what transgenderism is? Postmodernism, keep your hands up. Nihilism, feminism. Okay, Buchanism, what is that? No? All right, how about Cuculism? What is that? No idea. All right. So here's the thing. These last two, they're not a thing. I just made them up. Okay? Why? Because I wanted to focus on what is the objective of the course. What happens is, if we start going through this list is never ending. Now you could have courses upon courses upon courses about each one of these. But what the objective of this course is not to give you fish for a day, but it's to teach you how to fish. In other words, whatever new issue arises, in whatever time period you find yourself, that you have the tools to be able to deal with it, whatever the future brings. Because, let's say 50 years ago, no one thought transgenderism would be a real thing, right? Now all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, what do we do, right? So we don't want to be caught in that stage, another stage where something else comes up, and now what do we do? How do we deal with it? So what this objective of this course is to empower you and train you to be able to deal with any doubt from any sector, from any ideology, even if it's one that we're not exposed to just yet. Because there will always be new ideologies. There'll be always new fitan, right? There'll always be new trials and tribulations, intellectual and spiritual and so on and so forth. So this is really the objective. We want to teach you how to fish, not just give you the answers. And what that means is, you've been hearing me talk for a little while, but it means that this is going to get a lot more interactive as we move forward. So I know that this table's been the most vocal, but I'm going to pick on you all, so get ready, all right? Sorry, what? I don't know what this means.
Make sure you take notes.
Notes. Yeah, you can take notes. I mean, we sent out emails, right?
Yeah, but I see that crowd over there all the way in the front.
Don't worry. So look, notes is one. I have a certain philosophy about notes. So with me, I would rather you get the information, understand the information, as opposed to just writing notes. So I know I'm going completely against what Imran just said. I would rather you inculcate the information so that you can use it, as opposed to having these notes that you've taken, vigorous notes, that you go home, you put on a shelf, and inshallah one day, right? Khalas, right? So my thing with notes is I don't stress that too much. In fact, when people are taking too many notes, I'll be like, look man, stop taking notes, all right? I'm not saying if you're taking notes you have to stop, but just understand that you're going to be put under the gun here in a little bit. Okay, so let's start. What are we going to cover today? What is my objective? What do I hope to get through? We're going to start with something called a metaphysical backdrop. All right, now I'll explain what that means, what do we mean by metaphysical and all of that. Within that first section, the first thing I'm going to speak about, what I mentioned last night, is the concept of Islam is not a religion. All right, we'll get into that, We'll then move on to what is a worldview. Because this is, again, foundational, and I'm hoping that when you leave here, you'll have some aha moments. Some moments where you're like, certain things that you see that you can't unsee, like I said yesterday. What are the components of a worldview? We're going to talk about the limits of rationality. A lot of times when people enter into discussions, they think they can come up with a rational answer to every single question. And that's where they fall short. And this is actually a source of doubts. The idea that you can answer every single question. It's not true, right? The only one that has absolute knowledge is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By necessity, we are not all-knowing. So therefore we will have limits to our rationality. How do we navigate those limits? That's the point here. How do we say this is an appropriate limit and this is not? That's what we're going to talk about. And that last section there is what we call the fitrah, because it's very important understanding limits of rationality. The next step is actually the fitrah, which we'll talk about. After we finish that backdrop, and this is why I was saying the morning is the most important part of this course, after that we'll get into certain aspects of where do doubts come from? What is the nature of doubts? So we're going to have to speak about the nature of the heart. The heart's main fitan, right? In other words, the trials and tribulations. What are some of the source of doubt? And in the end, depending on how today goes, we'll look at 10 strategies to deal with your and other people's doubts. But those strategies, you have to have the metaphysical backdrop in order for those to actually work. If you just come in with those strategies, they may be even things that you know about, right? One of them, for instance, make dua. Now it sounds very overly simplistic. Someone's like, I'm having doubts, man. Go to the imam of the masjid, the imam says, make dua. And they're like, that's it, right? When you have the backdrop to understand why you should make dua, how dua impacts you, what is the state of your heart, then when you say, oh, now I understand the function of dua. How does dua work? What is the purpose of dua? You know, many times I tell this to people. I always say that as you grow older, people always tell you to be realistic, right? So as a child, your imagination is amazing, right? You start imagining all sorts of things that aren't even really possible. Oh, Baba, you know, I can't wait. I want to go out. I want to get on the back of a dragon. I'm going to have my castle on this dragon. It's going to be flying in the sky. And, you know, Dad's looking like, okay, yeah, that's nice, right? So imagine. But as you grow older, they always tell you, be realistic, be realistic, be realistic. And it becomes so ingrained that by the time you hit adulthood, that is everything. And that affects your dua too. Because then your dua is limited to, I need to get this job, I need to get this, I want to get married to this woman, da-da-da-da. So your dua becomes not to Allah, it becomes dua to yourself. You've limited your dua to what you feel is realistic. When the very concept of dua is to not be realistic, is to go beyond all of that, because you're making dua to the creator of the heavens and the earth, right? Anyways, I don't want to go on a soapbox on that, but point being, when we get to those 10 strategies, some of them might be very straightforward, but you need to have a backdrop before they actually have an impact. All right? Now, realistically, this is probably going to how the day goes. You'll notice it's much darker, it gets lighter. We may get there, we may not get there. Okay? I'm going to try my best to go through them. But what I'll do is, I will email you, since you guys showed up on time, if you gave your names and you did show up on time, I'm going to give you an alternative where you can actually find these 10 strategies. All right? So if you gave your email and you showed up on time, yay you. If you didn't, all right, let's hope we can get through them. Okay, Bismillah. Let's start with the metaphysical backdrop. Okay, let's start with a question. Should women have rights?
Yes.
Yes. Anyone say no? So how many people say women should have rights? Okay, very good. What if I said that I don't think women should have rights? Like, son, just go back home, go back to Texas, right? That's a Texas thing, all right? But what if I asked, why should a woman have rights? If I said, look, I don't think she should have rights. I don't think women should have rights. Khalas. Why should women have rights? Yes?
I think the question is problematic by itself.
Okay.
Yeah, because, you know, women already have rights. We don't.
You might want to ask the women that.
Fundamentally, they have rights. I don't say if they should or not. So there is something.
What do you mean fundamentally?
Fundamentally, women, a human being has a right.
Okay, that's good. How do human beings have rights? What if I say they shouldn't have rights? Again, we're not talking about ontological reality, right? We're talking about should they or shouldn't they. So there's an ought in this. So I'm saying, should women be given rights? Maybe that's a better way. I'm saying no, and you're saying yes, they should be given rights. I'm asking why? Why? Okay, wait. I should have said this earlier. You can't invoke Islamic principles. So without Islam, I want you to tell me, should women have rights? Or why should women have rights? You cannot use Islam. That's cheating. Wait. Say that again? But why should they have rights? That's my question. That's exactly because you just said like men have rights, therefore women have rights. Okay, why should men have rights? Khalas, now what? Yeah.
I would say because to question anyone's ability to have rights would mean that there's an oppressor in the room, right? So for somebody to say why should you have rights, then my question would be why would you question my right to have rights?
Okay. So is oppression wrong?
I would say on an objective case of morality or on one subjective case of morality, yes.
So it's both objective and subjective?
Depends who you are. Some people have an objective view of morality, while some people are subjective.
So how would you objectively ground oppression being immoral? Now remember, you can't use Islam. I'll let you think about that for a minute.
But I guess in that case, it just becomes purely subjective, right?
Right, okay, good. All right, yeah.
Well, what's wrong with asking why should men have rights in response to should women have rights?
I agree. So the question can be extended. Why should men have rights?
Animals. What should animals have?
Why should animals have rights? Good. Yeah.
So that we know how to interact between each other.
So what if I said that, if there was, if I could present you a society where women didn't have rights and everything was fine and dandy, would that be okay? Like, is there something fundamental about women having rights? And why? That's the question. Hold on 1 second, because I know you guys are on fire here. Yeah.
Okay, I would say like in a community or a society that like everyone have rights, that everyone like all the human beings can be happy. For example, like we have a society that none of them have rights. So the living, like the system of living will be complicated, everything will be chaotic. So having rights and being able to identify them will be like a very important part of the living. So
Okay.
for example, everyone has the right to breathe because if we didn't have the right to breathe, we would not be alive. So I would say
Okay. All right.
being able to live
Mhm.
is one of the rights. So if we didn't have it, so we can't say no one has rights.
So let me extend the question even further then. So you're saying, okay, the right to live. What if I said, okay, they don't even have the right to live? Like, I'll decide if they have the right to live or not to live. Khalas. It's a power dynamic now. Okay, if you were to ask like a feminist, let's say a hardened, ardent feminist, what is the philosophical basis for women's rights? What do you think he or she would say? Why should women have rights? What would be the answer? What would be their answer? What do you think?
Intrinsic value, that they have intrinsic value.
Right, so they have intrinsic value. But then if you kept pressing and saying, okay, well, why do they have intrinsic value? There's a certain underlying metaphysics, and this is where we're going to get into metaphysics. So metaphysics is literally, it means beyond the physical. Okay? So what that means is certain metaphysical concepts are things like concepts like God, that's beyond the physical. Concepts like your soul, ruh, that's beyond the physical. Concepts like ethics and morals, in fact, is a certain type of metaphysical concept. It's not a physical thing. I don't pick up like, oh, women's rights. Right? So these are metaphysical concepts. Now the issue is you have to then, when you are now plugging away at an ideology or worldview or whatever it might be, you have to understand what are the metaphysical foundations. So if you were to ask a feminist, why should a woman have rights? He or she may say, well, because I own myself. And in fact, that's not just in feminism, that's across all of liberalism. In fact, it's part of the modern world. So when you have, certain feminists on certain side of the let's say the abortion debate, and they're outside holding signs, what do those signs usually say? My body, my choice. In essence, what? I own myself. Is that an ethic that we follow? No, right? If you were to go to any funeral, what are people saying? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi ra'jun. Allah is the owner, right? So our metaphysic is very different. So when people start talking about, Islamic feminism, I always wonder, I'm like, why do you have to add Islamic in front of everything? Islamic feminism, Islamic democracy, Islamic socialism, Islamic capitalism. Islam is Islam, it's complete in of itself. Because Islam transcends a simple notion of women's rights. Because it also speaks about men's rights. It also speaks about animal rights. And it also speaks about the most important right, which is what? The right of Allah. Right? So our discourse on rights, in fact, is very robust, foundational. Why? Because our metaphysical foundations are ones that are rooted, that are stronger, right? Because if you say you own yourself, I could ask the question, why? How do you know you own yourself? Right? By the way, like I said, this is not only a part of feminism. So libertarians take this to another nth degree. Right? That's why they say you shouldn't pay taxes. right? So if you know about, anyone know any libertarians, right? So it's a political philosophy. They say, it should be minimum state, no taxes. What is the reasoning? They say, look, if it's true that we own ourselves, when you go to work and part of the money that you have earned goes to the government, that's a type of slavery. Because we own ourselves, we own our work. Who is the government, third party to come? That means a part of our work is for the government. We don't completely own ourselves. Why should we pay taxes? But this has certain philosophical ramifications. It's very problematic. I'll give you an example. In Germany, there was a gentleman, this is a few years ago, he put an ad in the paper. And in this ad it said, I would like to offer someone the opportunity to being eaten. Okay? Now you think it's a joke. This is absolutely true. I'm not making this up. 200 people responded to this ad. 200 people. He went through a thorough interview process. Okay? Finally, he selected one person after the application they sent. And by the way, he's not paying them anything. It's not like people showed up and said, okay, well, my family needs money, so you can eat me and then give my... No, free. Just for the experience of being eaten. Okay? So 200 people, it goes through, finally he has a candidate, he signs everything, the candidate says, you know what, yes, I'm doing it out of my own free choice, has him on video saying this, the whole 9 yards, chops him up, puts him in the freezer, enjoys him for the next year. Okay? The police show up, there are no laws against cannibalism in Germany up to this point. So like, what do we charge him with? Now, so they ended up charging him with murder. Now the thing is that what the defense, the case that they made, they said, if it's true we own ourselves, and he chose to be eaten, the government does not have a right to say who can be eaten, who cannot be eaten. Why? Self-ownership. You can extend that to things like suicide and things like that. The government has no right to do anything about it. Right? So you see how this becomes problematic. And just in a twist of events, he was convicted, went to jail, ended up as a vegan. I don't know, don't ask. I don't know what's going on there, but that's how it ended, okay? Anyway, so you understand metaphysical foundations are really important. And anytime someone comes to you with a doubt, you have to question the doubt. You have to ask the question, so what? You have to say, why is that true? You have to go beyond the surface level and not just accept what they're saying. A lot of times Muslims accept what the person is saying and their arguments get what they call straw manned. So the person builds up this Muslim over here out of straw and then punches him and then, aha, look, we won. Because we have not investigated and interrogated the foundations. Is that clear? So this is what we're talking about when we talk about metaphysical foundations. Now, let's move on to Islam is not a religion. Actually, before I get to that, so I'm making the claim that Islam is not a religion. How many people agree with that claim? Raise your hands. So, okay, a few people. How many people disagree with that claim? All right, that's good. Fair enough. All right. Let me give you the central thesis of my claim. Why I say Islam is not a religion. Understanding Islam as a religion, quote unquote, does not allow us to accurately compare it to dominant ideologies such as feminism, transgenderism, liberalism. Therefore, Islam is not a religion. So essentially what my argument is that if you categorize Islam as a religion, you have confined it to a certain conceptual domain, a certain space. You've quarantined it there. And so when it comes to concepts like feminism, like transgenderism, like these ideologies, it does not hold, you're not on the same playing field. Right? Because now you're saying that's religion, this is non-religion. So we can put Islam on the side. We don't want Islam to intervene and interact and have anything to do with it. Right? And this is a conceptual problem. And that's why I'm saying it's not a religion. Okay, let's move on. Alright. So I went to the UK. I go there often because our head office is there. And the brothers were like, look, let's go to the gym. So I go to the gym, I'm like, guys, I need to use the and I was like, what do they call it here? The loo, right? Whatever they call it, right? The bathroom. They're like, yeah, it's over there, go down there, you go there. So I go there and I see this sign, all right? It says disabled toilet. So I'm like, oh man, that sucks. So I go back and I'm like, look man, I went to the bathroom, but the toilet's broken. So like, what are you talking about, man? And so we go to the toilet. He's like, looked at it, he's like, no, man, that's a disabled. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, people that are disabled. I'm like, oh, you mean handicapped? They're like, yeah. I'm like, son, to me, that looks like the toilet's broken, right? Why am I mentioning that? Well, because the word disabled, it's going to depend upon who uses it and where they use it. And so there is what you could say, with religion, it's a very similar concept. So when I say Islam is not a religion, I'm not writing it out of the books entirely. And there's reasons for that, right? One of those is political expediency. If we start saying Islam is not a religion, religious freedom doesn't apply to Muslims in the United States. So I'm not writing it off completely. But what I want us to understand is that there's a descriptive understanding and a normative understanding. All right, so this is where the complicated words start, but we're going to get into both of those. Okay? When I say normative versus descriptive, right? So if I were to ask one of you, tell me what does the word Islam mean, or what is Islam as a concept? What is it?
Submission.
Submission, yes. Anybody else? What's Islam? What's Islam, man? Yes.
One God.
The one God? Okay, what's Islam?
I was going to say submission, to submit to the Creator.
Submit to the Creator, yes. Peace, okay, in a sense, yeah. Oh, you're going to say that too? Okay. More or less, what you guys understand of Islam would be what we would call a normative understanding. What that means is what Islam says about itself, how it should be understood. Now let me give you a descriptive understanding of Islam. Let's say I go off to Midland, Texas. Anyone ever been there? Okay. You've been to Midland? Oh, you were? Okay, so you definitely, okay, you've been there. Okay. Let's say I go to Midland, Texas, right? It's not Houston, it's not Dallas, it's not Austin, it's Midland. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And I get some random person, I pick him, right? Kind of a, let's say a heavy-set white guy with a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. And I go up to him, I say, hey man, what's Islam? Do you think his answer is going to be, oh, submission and peace? And no, he's going to be like, you mean that craziness that them terrorists are doing halfway across the world, killing all these people? That's Islam. That is a descriptive understanding of Islam. Meaning that when you say the word Islam, what is the thing that comes up in a person's mind? How would they describe that phenomenon? Okay? Yes?
So it depends on who you're actually asking.
Exactly. But here's the thing. A descriptive understanding is going to be based upon the person you're asking. A normative understanding, again, is based upon how it should be understood. What does it actually mean? Everyone clear about this? What, in other words, when we say normative, we're saying normal. That's another way of kind of understanding that. And this term is important, normative. And it's used very often. Like if I asked you, hey man, are you guys heteronormative? Anyone know what that means? No. Nobody knows what that means?
Like identifying and acting whatever your gender is.
Heteronormative means, so I said normative means how something should be. What's normal. So now you have heterosexual relationships and homosexual relationships. So if you say I'm heteronormative, you believe heterosexual relationships are normal, and what's abnormal is what? Right. And so that's why it has a negative connotation in the society. You're heteronormative? Oh, terrible. Right? Are you cisnormative? Like, what does that mean? Well, do you believe in two genders? A male and a female. How dare you? You're cisnormative? Terrible. Right? It's like a curse word almost, now that you use it. But if you say cis, what that means is you believe two genders are normal. That is normative. That is how something should be. So far so good? Okay, yeah.
Isn't it the same description as you're going to divide it in normative and descriptive? The word religion, I mean, a lot of us, when you honor the word religion, we'll always go to the descriptive way of understanding.
And that's exactly my point. You're about to go right to my point. Okay, yes, inshallah. So most of the time when we use, and by the way, this normative, just if you, it's interesting if you go to Google Ngram viewer, you type in normative. Why were we talking about? Remember, we talked about language. Look at how the term has started to be used since the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 80s, 2000s. Now It's used all over the place. And that's why we said language is important. If you don't know what normativity is, and someone says, are you heteronormative, are you cisnormative, and you're in this discussion, you're already on a losing playing field because you're not even understanding what they're talking about, right? I mean, now you are, inshallah, right? Okay, anyway, so moving on. All right, so what am I saying about religion? The term religion itself. What I'm saying is that actually I don't want you guys reading this, so hold on a second, because I know everyone's going to be like, okay. What I'm saying is, if we understand religion as a concept in a normative way, then Islam is a religion. The problem is, most people, when you say religion, they're understanding it in a descriptive way. They have already quarantined the concept to a certain conceptual domain. They say, that is religion. Is science religion? Well, descriptively, I'm saying most people do not think, okay, science, they think polar opposites, right? So you're already at a conceptual disadvantage when you put Islam in that box. That's what I'm trying to say, descriptively. But how do we say that, what do we mean by religion being normative then? Well, first of all, this is discussed in academia. They actually don't have a definition of religion as something that is clearly defined, right? Some theorists actually say that religion isn't even a thing because the boundaries are so, the conceptual boundaries are so wide that anything could be religion, right? Nevertheless, I think we have to understand, where does the concept of religion come from? It is not a concept that is trans-historic, meaning it hasn't always existed. It has a certain birth, and that birth, it's a European birth at a certain time. So, Shahab Ahmad, rahimahullah, he passed away, he writes, he says, fundamental here are the consequences of the fact that the concept and term religion, as it is used today in the language of modern analysis by scholars and laymen, emerged in the wake of the devastating European wars of religion. It is a byproduct of Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment Europe. So it starts in Europe. Hold on one second. Religion was articulated as an instrument and expression of the social and intellectual struggle of Europeans to free themselves from the monopoly of the totalizing truth claims that were made by and exercised from the social, political, intellectual, and material institution of the Christian church. Where did it come from? It came from the concept, you have a church, it's making religious totalizing truth claims. They're saying this is true, this is not true. And if you want to now go against the church, you're going to be in trouble. And so they went to wars over these things. 1530 to 1630, devastating, terrible wars to say, no, we want to now rid ourselves of the authority of the Christian church. But in doing that, they made this concept called religion. So it actually has a genealogy, it has a birth, it has a starting point. If you were to take this concept and go to other times and places, religion as a concept, you would not find it. Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm understanding. So, would it be equal to the concept of the separation of church and state? That's what created religion versus
Yeah. Yes. Because that's, if you think about it, religion and secularism. What is the secular? It's saying there's secular space. But you cannot even map that upon Islam. What is secularism? How do we even understand that? Is there a secular version of Islam? I mean, no, we're going to see why in just a second, right? But yes, you're right. That whole separation of church and state, that has a backdrop. That has a historical backdrop, which is specifically European, which was then exported across the world by way of colonialism, right? That's why even countries now, they're, Muslim countries, they've adopted it. Say, no, religion is a thing, and, we'll have a discourse about religion and secularism and so on and so forth. Now, my point is not to get into the etymology of the word, the history of the word. Conceptually, I want us, when we are engaged with the concept of religion, to understand that this is not a box you can put Islam into. For us, I'm not saying this is what you're going to use as a dawah instrument or someone that's having doubts. For us to understand conceptually. It's very important. I'm not saying this as a dawah tool or something like this. Okay? Now, I'm going to skip that one. So here's the thing. When we make religion our lens, rather than say truth or meaning, we are confronted with a difficulty in conceptualizing Islam. If you say that Islam is a religion among other religions, then what you're essentially doing is saying there's a truth amongst other truths, in a sense. if you just put it in the box of religion. Well, that's your religion, that's my religion, that's freedom of religion, and so on and so forth. But now if you move away from the discourse of just Islam being one religion to say, no, Islam is the truth, with a capital T, right? That's a different dynamic altogether. And what that does is, it actually invokes within you a type of confidence about Islam. Because now you understand there's truth and there's falsehood. There's Islam and there's not Islam. Khalas. That is your binary. You start looking at the world like that. Yeah.
Couldn't you say, talking about Islam in the context of other religions, that there are different beliefs of truth, not different truth amongst truths?
It's a different perception of what they believe to be true. But the truth itself is only one. And that truth is Islam. So yes, there's truth, and then there is how you understand the truth. There could be a different understanding, because we're human beings, but the truth itself as a reality, there's only one, right? Al-haqqu min rabbik, fala takunanna min al-mumtarin, right? The truth is from your Lord. So the truth, that's why even one of the names of Allah is Al-Haqq, right? So truth is absolute. And so if you understand that Islam, and you understand it in the terms of truth and meaning, as opposed to religion, it's actually empowering for you. Because now you know everything besides Islam, khalas. So when I say things like kufr will always contradict itself, you know what I'm talking about. Anything that's outside of the Islamic paradigm, anything that comes outside of Islam will always be philosophically problematic. Always. Whether we're talking about Judaism, whether we're talking about Christianity, feminism, postmodernism, they will always have internal inconsistencies. And if you dig far enough, you'll be able to find them. Okay? All right. I don't want to belabor the point too much. Now, interestingly enough, this concept was ingrained in many translations. Because remember, the very first early translations of the Quran, I think one of the earliest ones was Edward Sale, back in like 18 something, right? But translations, generally I'm talking about the English language, you will find that there's certain concepts that get imported into the translation. This is why translations become very problematic, right? One of those is simply translating the word deen as religion. But it's problematic when you think about the etymology or the backdrop of the word deen. And I'll give you an example. Here's a really good example. So for those of you who know Surah Yusuf, remember Surah Yusuf has the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. At the end of that story, right, because I'm not going to get into the whole story, I'm assuming that you guys have enough Islamic backdrop to know it. If you remember, at the end of the story, he's now the finance minister in a sense, and now his brother is there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here's the translation first. So he began the search of their bags before the bag of his brother. Then he extracted it, meaning the object from the bag of his brother. Thus did we plan for Joseph. He could not have taken his brother within the religion of the king except that that Allah had willed. This makes no sense. What does, in our descriptive understanding of religion, the religion of the king, what does that have to do with anything? He can be an atheist, a Christian, a Jew. Why does it matter? Because that's not what the translation should be, right? The translation is coming from fi deen al-malik. Deen is much more expansive. Deen comes from a number of different roots, right? Or not a number of different roots, but it comes from the idea, for instance, that you have a type of debt. There's a give and take. That's why Allah is Maliki Yawmiddin. The day of, not the day of religion, obviously, it's the day when your debts come due. So in this context, if you think about a legal system is about reward and punishment. If you do this, the state will reward you, right? Whatever it might be. If you do this, the state will hold you accountable. And so it is the legal system of the king that's being spoken, right? So deen is much more comprehensive because it not only includes, let's say, religion, it has to do with moral and legal ramifications. When you enter into the debate about abortion, about euthanasia, about same-sex marriages, understand that all of that comes under the rubric of deen, because it has to do with reward and punishment that goes beyond this limited world, right? So the concept of deen is much broader. Okay. Actually, I'm going to skip some of these. And I kind of mentioned this already. This is why when an ayah like this, and whoever desires other than Islam as religion, never will be accepted of him. This becomes a bit problematic when you're speaking to non-Muslims. Oh, Islam doesn't believe in the freedom of religion. See? Right? But what is Allah saying here? You're saying if this is the creator of the heavens and the earth, what He's saying is, and whoever desires, right? Whoever desires غير الإسلام دينا فلن يقبل منه. Whoever desires a deen, whoever desires truth, whoever desires a comprehensive worldview other than Islam, Allah will not accept it. In other words, if you desire something other than the truth, obviously Allah will not accept it, right? Obviously. But if you say religion, now you've got to squirm. You've got to, oh, wait a minute. No, we believe in freedom of religion. No. Remember the Ottoman Empire? They had lots of freedom. Whatever, right? As opposed to saying, no, obviously the only thing that Allah accepts is the truth. And that's why you should accept the truth too. Anyway, so what I mentioned here, a deen other than Islam will have inconsistencies and cracks. Because a deen other than Islam is going to be rooted in falsehood. Whether that, and again, deen, we're talking comprehensive, and we'll get into what I'm talking about here, okay? A deen, and I think a better word would be worldview. Personally, I think if we're going to use it in the English language, although I don't think there's a direct kind of, it's difficult just to give like a quick translation of words from one language to another, especially when it comes to the Arabic language, to any other language. I think a closer word would be worldviews. Now, okay, so let me stop here for a second because I've been going on for a little while. Any questions up to this point? Everyone clear? Yes.
Why do you go with worldview versus ideology?
So you could use ideology as well. I'm going to get into why I'm going with worldview, but ideology has to do more with like ideas. Ideas kind of, there's a kind of a flexibility in there. So that's why I'm hesitant in saying Islam is an ideology, for instance. Right? Just because of the negative connotations that come with it. Again, it goes back to the rhetorical usage of the term. So ideologies, if you go to a feminist and say, oh, the feminist ideology, they may get offended, right? So it...
The same with worldview, anarchy,
Sure.
That notion of, well, this is my view, this is my opinion.
But this is why we're going to start with what is a worldview. Because a view and a worldview are two different things. Yeah.
We know in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about Islam, using Ibrahim alayhi salam, who sammakum al-Muslimin.
Yeah.
We know that, again, I'm using the word religion not as descriptive or,
Just use deen. Halas.
But, Judaism and Christianity came after that, and they were Muslim in their originality of how the message was. I'm afraid that when we use Islam, we are actually presupposing or pushing the idea that Islam has, as we know it, is what Islam is. Not as Ibrahim alayhi salam, called us Muslim. So when you say Islam, do you mean that all the other message that came from Allah also Islam, or we're just talking about after Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam?
Taban, I'm talking about the entirety of Islam, right? Obviously, in this day and age, it would be limited to what the Prophet ﷺ came with, right? Because we don't have access to what was given to Isa alayhi salam or Musa alayhi salam. But as an overall concept, historically across, you're absolutely right? So Islam so the issue is that when we talk about Islam in terms of the Sharia, for instance, there's going to be different Sharias that were sent down, and there's a certain wisdom to that, which you can ask me about later, which then encompasses Islam as a concept. So even for them, the true deen was Islam. Its manifestation was different, and like I said, there's reasons for that, right? Okay, let's start with this question. First of all, let me get everyone to stand up for a second. And stretch if you want to. And let's everyone do 10 jumping jack. No, I'm kidding. All right. Everyone good? All right, sit down, inshallah. Okay. What is a worldview? So notice I'm waiting because I'd like someone to answer it. What do you think?
A worldview, I think you could notice from the word, it's like the view of the world.
Very good. You know what's really amazing when young people answer questions is that they don't augment it with all sorts of complications, right? Because when I ask this question, when you ask adults, they get into all sorts of philosophies. Well, the worldview, you understand the paradigmatic shift, the blah, 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 blah. I'm like, dude, I'm just asking what a worldview is. It's in the word. It's the view of the world. That's all, right? Jazakallah khair. I appreciate that. All right. So in essence, what is a worldview? It's how you view the world. It's how, to extend it further, how you view reality. Okay? So, why is this important? Well, I've taken this from James Anderson. He says, a person's worldview represents his most fundamental beliefs and assumptions about the universe he inhabits. Right? And now you're going to see why I think using worldview is a little closer to deen, right, than religion. It reflects how he would answer all the big questions of human existence. Fundamental questions about who and what we are, where we came from, why we're here, where, if any, we're headed, the meaning and purpose of life, the nature of the afterlife, what counts as good life here and now. Interesting enough, he says, few people think through these questions in any depth. And fewer still have answers to such questions, but a person's worldview will at least incline him towards certain kinds of answers and away from others. When you are confronted with doubts, the main role that you have to interrogate first is, what is your worldview? Even if you claim to be Muslim, you still have to say, wait a minute, what is my worldview? Is it really Islam, or is it something else? Right? Because you could have, a religion of Islam, but have a worldview of liberalism. Right? In fact, much of the Muslim world is like that, unfortunately. Okay. So what is a worldview? A worldview shape and inform our experiences of the world around us. Like spectacles with colored lenses, they affect what we see and how we see it. Depending on the color of these lenses, some things may be seen more easily. Conversely, they may be de-emphasized or distorted. Indeed, some things may not be seen at all. I like the glasses analogy, because what we're talking about is, how do you interpret what is true and what is not true? If I was wearing lenses that were green, glasses that had green lenses, and let's say you were wearing glasses that had red lenses, and we went outside and we looked at a tree, and I said the leaves are green, and you said no, the leaves are red, we would argue incessantly. And you can give me all the propositional logic in the world, and I can give you all the logic in the world. The issue has nothing to do with the argument. It has to do with what? The glasses. Right? So until you can interrogate the actual glasses, you're not going to make any sort of progress. Until your view of reality is not correct, it doesn't really matter. You could have these arguments ad infinitum. People can ask you all sorts of questions. Tell me about the age of Aisha. How can you say that? Blah, 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 blah. What about 4 wives in Islam? Blah, 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 blah. All those questions come up. And one of the main issues is, what are the lenses that the person is wearing? And this is why I'm saying this will empower you, inshallah. Okay, so first off, and this is why the glasses analogy falls short, because there's no such thing as taking off the glasses. Every single person has a worldview. Doesn't matter if you're an atheist, an agnostic, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, every person has a worldview. Just like every person speaks a language, you can't be languageless. Even if you can't speak, you still have to think in a language. Just like that, everyone has a worldview, right? Now what happens is, if you speak 2 languages, you have one that's dominant and one that's secondary. A lot of times what happens when Islam becomes our worldview and we're engaged with the society around us, it's much like people speaking 2 languages. One will become dominant and one will be kind of in a certain space, right? So for those of you who are trying to teach your children Arabic or Urdu or whatever other second language you're going to teach them, it's usually the English language that's primary and the Arabic and Urdu and whatever else is secondary. So that's usually the weaker language. Islam becomes like that as well. Out in the world, what's primary is kind of liberalism, feminism, whatever they're engaged with. At home or in the masjid, then Islam becomes a worldview. But which one is stronger? You see what I'm saying, right? So every person has a worldview. No one can say, oh, I can transcend worldviews. I can be objective. This notion of objectivity, there's no way to do it, right? Every person has a worldview. Let's start off. Okay. Just like, and it's interesting that in engaging with this, the Quran makes some interesting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions some interesting. So for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِكُلِّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا. Everyone has a direction towards which he faces. So just like everyone has a language that they speak, everyone has a worldview, everyone has a direction. You cannot be directionless. Even if you're dead, the body is still facing a direction. So Allah says everyone has a direction which they face, right? فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, right? So then race to all which is good. By the way, this ayah is in Surah Al-Baqarah. Does anyone know what this is talking about? Let me get the youngsters here. Yeah.
Having a path, even if you're lost, you're still going to a disruption. So, like having a pathway.
Okay, but it's a very specific context I'm looking for. Yeah.
Are you talking about what Surah Baqarah is talking about?
Yep. This ayah is talking about something specific. I'll give you a hint. In the Sirah. In the Madani period. Sorry? Tarbiyah? The Qibla. Bizabt. Yes, it's absolutely very good. It's talking about the Qibla. So you remember that when the Muslims first went to Medina, which way were they praying? Towards Baytul Maqdis, right? Towards Jerusalem. And you know, it was the hope of the Prophet ﷺ, as is mentioned in the Quran, that he wanted it to be Mecca, right? Now this ayah comes down, right, is that everyone has a direction. It's in the context of the Qibla. What I find really interesting is when you are sitting in the 21st century in Sacramento, California, and you're reading like this changing of the Qibla, many Muslims, this became a big source of doubt at the time. Many of the Sahaba were like, wait a minute, this is, you know, how or when or what? You read about this. And reading it from a 21st century perspective, like, well, why was it such a big deal? Yani, if you're praying this way or you're praying this way, who cares? Right? Because we understand at that time, the idea of direction was related to the idea of your worldview. Right? And that's why Ibn Kathir mentions, or not Ibn Kathir, well, I'll go into what Ibn Kathir mentions. He says, this talks about the followers, every nation, وَلِكُلِّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا, every nation has a direction which they face. This talks about the followers of the various, and I'm translating his term religions, I think he says adyan, various religions. Hence, every nation and tribe has its own qibla that they choose, while Allah's appointed qibla is what the believers face. Right? And continues on, says, Abu Aliya mentions, the Jews have a direction which he faces, the Christian has a direction which he faces. Allah has guided you, O Muslim, Ummah, to a qibla which is the true qibla. Interestingly enough, after this page, at the end he says, this last ayah is similar to what Allah has said, and then he mentions this ayah. لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. To everyone we have made a law and a method, a sharia, right? And a way to understand that sharia. Everyone. This kind of bolsters my view of why I'm saying that Islam should be understood as a worldview. Right? Why? Because your worldview will tell you or dictate for you what is morally right and morally wrong. Right? Remember, you were talking about feminism, you know, the assumptions there. That's based on a feminist worldview. Right? Okay, moving on. All right, so worldviews also largely determine people's opinions on matters of ethics and politics. What a person thinks about abortion, euthanasia, same-sex relationships, environmental ethics, economic policy, public education, and so on will depend on his underlying worldview more than anything else. When you are arguing these things with someone, even on a moral basis, their morals are going to be determined by their worldview. Let me give just a very raw example. Right? If you have an atheist, let's say someone who believes in what we call philosophical naturalism, they believe that everything is by way of natural functions, right? So you cannot give an explanation that is not part of the material world. That's basically what a naturalist is, right? And this is an assumption within science as well. So when you study science in school, this is an underlying assumption. Okay. I always think, like, how do they form ethics? Where do they have the moral grounding for their ethics? In the concept of what we call meta-ethics. So if you ask them, why is a particular thing ethical? There's no grounding. Oh, because it just, what? Just it is? It's part of human rights? It's part of, why? There's absolutely no grounding. And yet they're so adamant with certain concepts, and as if it's objective, but the grounding is completely missing from their worldview, right? So, okay. So how do we understand a worldview? So if you take anything at all from today, I want you to take a picture of this and understand it, okay? So I'll give you a minute. Everyone got it? Yep? Okay. So what are the components of a worldview? So we said everyone has a worldview. Everyone has something that determines what they believe to be right and wrong. But we can now break it down into a type of hierarchy. Okay? Now I said we're going to be using some words. This is where people get really, they get scared and they run off and be like, words! And they run off, right? So, all right. Let's start at the top. And I want you to understand this conceptually before anything else. Don't worry about the language just yet. Conceptually is what I want you guys to kind of take home. Number one, ontology. Ontology talks about what exists. When we ask the question, what exists? Do I exist? Does this table exist? Does the real world exist? Now you might think these are common sense things, like who denies the existence of the real world? In fact, strong strands in postmodernism deny the existence of the real world, believe it or not. Because they say, why should the real world impede on my freedoms? Khalas, there's no real world. Right? I know it sounds strange because it's intuitive. Like this table, it exists. It's here, right? Proving it would be a whole nother fiasco. So ontological questions are questions about what exists and what does not exist. Right? Does the tree outside exist? One of the main questions when it comes to what exists and what doesn't exist, does God exist? If the answer to that question is yes, then you will have a theology. And you'll notice the theology is actually higher than ontology for a reason. So what is theology? Theology is questions about who is God, what is the relationship between God and man, and so on. Okay? But again, depending on your answer to what exists, it's going to have ramifications on morality and ethics, which is way down here. If you don't believe that God exists, that's going to have an impact on what you believe is right and wrong. Right? Very clearly. Okay. So what exists? But now you'd have to ask, well, how do I know what exists? So then you move to what we call epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. How do you know something to be true? Right? What are your sources of knowledge? How do you know X, Y, and Z is true? Those are epistemological questions. Okay? Which we'll get into in a second. The next, and what you'll notice is, look at the grading, the color grading. And I've done that intentionally. Why? Because you can say they're kind of order of importance. If you start arguing about morality and ethics down here, and you don't understand your interlocutors or the person you're speaking to, what their ontology or epistemology is, you're going to argue forever. Okay? So, anthropology. By the way, is anyone studying anthropology at school? You are? You are studying? You were studying? Okay. That's not the anthropology I'm talking about. All right? What I'm talking about is, from the word itself, the study of the human being. Who or what is man? Are we just material matter? Or do we have a soul? Again, the answer to that question is going to have an effect on what you feel is right or wrong. Okay? So, who or what is a human being? Are we just material matter? Do we have a soul? Do we define consciousness by way of that soul, and so on and so forth? The next question would be teleology, purpose. Does the universe have a purpose? Do I have a purpose? What is my purpose? What is the purpose of the universe? Again, depending on the answer. Then you come all the way down, then you come to morality and ethics. It's after going through all of that, interrogating all of that in a person's worldview, then now you can engage in moral and ethical questions. You can talk about abortion, you can talk about same-sex relationships, you can talk, all those things, you have to have the backdrop before you engage with those questions. Many times you'll find, even among Muslims, we'll jump into these discussions and the initial foundations, the metaphysical backdrop is totally missed over. Okay? Morality and ethics. From morality and ethics, that's where you get law and politics, obviously, right? What is just law, what is good law, and so on and so forth. And you'll notice at the end I have their aesthetics. Beauty. By the way, my dissertation, because I'm doing a PhD right now, it's on beauty. How to use beauty as a dawah tool. Anyways, once it's published, I'll let you guys know, inshallah. But anyway, aesthetics. For me, this is the most fascinating one, even though it's one way down on the list. Okay, your worldview will also determine what you find beautiful. How so? I'll give you an example. Let's do a thought experiment. Can we do that?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to tell me, I'll start calling on you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Okay, you're ready? I can call on anyone, okay? Don't want you to blurt it out. I'm going to call in as you as individuals. So here's the word. You ready? Everyone ready? I can call on anyone. So if you're asleep, now it's not time to wake up. No, I'm not looking at anyone on that table specifically. I'm just saying in general. All right, here we go. Here's the word. The word is art. Art. A-R-T, art. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Go. Artist. Okay, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Sorry? Read.
Yeah.
When you hear art.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Paintings. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Canvas. First thing that comes to your mind? Your daughter. She took art history. Okay. Okay, fair enough. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Art pieces. Okay. First thing that comes to your mind, Imran. Subjective. Okay, khalas. All right. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Yep, you. Like first thing that comes to your mind. What is the first thing? First thing that pops in your mind. Painting. Okay. First thing that pops in your mind. Painting. You as well. Okay. First thing that pops in your mind, young man, right there. Sorry? Ideas? That's the first thing you think about when you think of art? Okay. Good. Last one. Flowers. Okay. You know what I find interesting is most of the people, I'm not saying all the people, and I've done this across the US, will generally, when they think about art, they will be inclined to say something about a visual sensation. Okay? So you'll see, here's like things like painting, you'll hear things like Van Gogh, you'll hear things about, art pieces and things like that. So the question arises, why didn't anyone focus on the auditory sensation of art, like music, like the Quran, and I'm not judging anyone, but I want us to understand why we go straight to visual art and not auditory art. The reason is not because you don't exist in a vacuum, right? Again, if you go back to the European paradigm, when it came to understanding the divine, so at that time, very early on, when the church was running things, when it came to, and this was the worldview of all of Europe, was Christianity by and large, they said, how can we make the divine more beloved in the hearts of people? So they said, well, we can do that by way of iconography. We can make stained glass paintings. Why? Because the word became flesh, right? And so now you have paintings, you have sculptures, you have all of that. If you were to juxtapose that with this pre-modern Islamic world, what do you find? You find calligraphy. You find the stress is not on a visual understanding of art, but an auditory understanding of beauty and art. Okay? Poetry, big time. Poetry, right? So the question is, why is it that we immediately go to the visual arts? Well, because we are living in the backdrop and we are inheritors of the European tradition, right? It's just whether we like it or not, whether we come from a land that was colonized or we were brought up in the US, whatever it might be. So your backdrop of understanding what is beautiful and what is not beautiful, it's dictated and informed by your worldview. And that's how subtle it is. I'll give you one other quick example here, how deep this runs. So there's this one like optical illusion where there's like two lines. I don't know if you guys have seen it, and one has like one kind of going upwards and one has one going downwards, right? And so they present this picture, and it's really interesting because most people when they see it, they'll say that line A is longer than line B. All right, are you guys familiar with this experiment? I think most of us know it. Okay. Now, when they initially did this experiment, I think it was back in the 1960s, they did it and they said like 80% of the people saw line A as smaller than line B. But what they realized is that all of the experiments were done by people that are weird. Well, what do I mean? I don't mean like weird individuals. Weird is an acronym. Western, educated, industrialized, right? Democratic, whatever it stands for, right? So they said, what if we take the same experiment and go to somewhere that is not part of the Western world? So they took it to certain places in Africa. I think it was Angola and one other place. And they asked kind of village people. And what they found is 95% of the village people did not see the optical illusion. Okay, now this is strange, right? Like, why would that be the case? And what they realized is that it has to do with their architecture. When you think about your architecture, even the building we're in right now, everything is very angular, straight, angular. The Western world, in and of itself, office buildings, masajid, like here, they're very angular. So our depth perception causes us to see an optical illusion because of the way the lines are. But those people living in those villages, all of their structures were more earthly, more round, more kind of in tune with the natural world. When they looked at those lines, they were not subject to a depth perception. They saw it as lines. So your optics are affected by your worldview, where you exist, how you interpret the world, right? It's very powerful stuff, you know? You want one more example or should we go on? Another interesting example. You want one more? Yes? How many people want one more example? Okay, good. I'll give you one more example. So when you think about maps, most of us, when we look at a map, we see that North America is on top and South America is on the bottom. Europe is on top and Africa is generally on the bottom, right? Okay. Has that always been the case? What do you think? No, of course not. Because you had Muslim cartographers, like for instance, out of the 12th century, Muhammad al-Idrisi, rahimahullah ta'ala. When he drew the map, he drew it the other way around. He drew Europe on the bottom, and he drew Africa on top, and Mecca in the center. So the question is, why did he draw the map like that? And the map that we have today, it's based on the model of Ptolemy. It's a Ptolemaic map that's before Muhammad al-Idrisi. Well, one of the reasons is because the reality is, if you were to go to outer space, there's no objective way of knowing what's up and what's down, right? Like cardinal direction in outer space is nothing. I mean, I know in pictures they usually show it the way, like North America on top, South America on bottom. But the reality is in space, there's no way to know what is top and bottom. You're in outer space. So there's no objective reality to what is up and what is down. So why did Ptolemy draw it the way he did and Muhammad al-Idrisi draw it the way he did? Because in Ptolemy's worldview, Europe was on top because Europe was the dominant power. In Muhammad al-Idrisi's worldview, what was the dominant power? Islam, right? And where were the majority of the Muslims in his space? Muslim Spain was North Africa. So he's drawing that on top and Europe on the bottom. Very interesting that Ptolemy was residing in Egypt and Muhammad al-Idrisi was residing in Spain. So he was residing in Europe, but he put it on the bottom, and he was residing in Egypt, but and so on and so forth. So they're actually residing in different places. What's my point in all of this? This has real world ramifications. Because how you understand cardinal direction, there's a certain reality that comes about. Okay? And this is true for all technology. So before you have the advent of maps, how you understood where you were in the world was more kind of natural. You understood where you were by where you were. Okay? So it wasn't that, but once you have someone that's now drawn a map, that map has an impact on where you think you are, spatially. Because now you're not just thinking about direct experience, you're thinking about, wait a minute, the map says I'm here, I must be here. Now, if you want to take that even further, some maps nowadays not only dictate what you think of where you are, but even tell you where to go, right? Turn right. You're like, and you turn right? Anyway, why am I mentioning this? When I was saying these have real world ramifications, they did a study of how certain moving companies charge their customers. And what they found is that on average, and I think they took a sample set, maybe somewhere in Texas, maybe in California, a few other places, they said on average, moving companies will charge $250 more going from south to north than going north to south. Why? Because of that perception. When you go south to north, it's like you're going uphill. It's difficult. You just perceive it to be more difficult. And when you're going north to south, it's like you're going down. So it's easy. So based on that perception, which has no reality, because it's based on a map that was made by Ptolemy, they actually are able to charge you more money. And that's all based on what? Worldviews. Had it been like an Islamic map, maybe Muslims might have done the other way around, right? Allahu A'lam. So you understand the power of worldviews, right? And once you understand that, and you understand its components, it should now empower you that when you start dealing with doubts, when people start saying things about Islam, when they start criticizing Islam on this or that or whatever it might be, understand that this person is coming from a certain worldview. Okay, moving on. Let's do a couple of comparisons so we'll compare a couple of things within the Islamic worldview versus the modern worldview, just to send this home. And then we'll take a break, promise, all right? So we'll talk first about ontology, what exists and what doesn't exist. Number one, so we'll talk about God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islamic worldview, obviously, Allah exists. Modern worldview, big question mark. In the Islamic worldview, there's an unseen realm, alam al-ghayb. So that includes angels, jinns, barzakh, ruh, and so on and so forth. In the modern worldview, denied. The supernatural world, by and large, is basically denied. The seen realm, alam al-shahada, accepted in Islamic worldview, accepted in the modern worldview, more what we call empirical or natural world. Under the Islamic worldview, you have resurrection and judgment, al-ma'ad, moral accounting, heaven, hell. Under the modern worldview, there's no identifiable, what we call eschaton. Eschaton means things that happen at the end. So if someone says, when they talk about hadith, there are certain hadith that are eschatological. What that means is these are hadith that are talking about end times and what happens after death. So hadith about ad-Dajjal, hadith about the Mahdi, hadith about the final battle. All those hadith are eschatological hadith. Okay? That's what eschatology means. So just to add to your vocabulary, if there hasn't been enough already. Okay. The Islamic cosmos, human life, purpose and meaning. Under the modern worldview, objective meaning or theology denied. What I'd like you to appreciate, not that I want you to sit here and memorize this table, I want you to appreciate how full, how pregnant, how rich content there is in the Islamic worldview, and how weak, empty, emaciated, content-wise, that's part of the modern worldview. That's all I want you to appreciate when you see this, right? You have to understand the position you're coming from is very heavy, rich with content, infused with content. Whereas when you compare it to the modern worldview, it's got like what, the empirical world, and that's it, right? Okay, very quickly, we'll do epistemology. How do you know what you know? So from the Islamic worldview, sources of knowledge include revelation, right? Wahi, the Quran, the Sunnah, so on and so forth. We also have sense experience, what we call hiss. Modern worldview has it too. We have a concept of reason, aql. The modern worldview has it as well. We also have the concept of testimony or report, khabar sadiq. In the modern worldview, it's there but not conceptually central. And I want to spend a minute on this very quickly. When people start talking to you about, let's say, hadith, you find some people say, like, how do we know the Prophet ﷺ said that? How many people have heard this before? Right? Well, how do you know the Prophet ﷺ said that? Well, those are old narrations, because some political issue and blah, 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 whatever they come up with. What people fail to do is they don't go to the metaphysical foundations. Now this is, I'm stressing this over and over and over again. Before you get to hadith, you have to ask the question, when it comes to how you know what you know, where do you get your information? And what my claim is, and it's not even a claim, I'm just going to say it, and I'd like you to challenge me on it if you'd like to. The majority of what you know about anything comes from the say-so of somebody else. The majority is testimonial knowledge. Most of it. Very little comes from direct experience, and your direct experimentation. Most of what you know. And the problem is that most people within the West don't consider that conceptually central, they just kind of accept it. So when you're studying a science, for instance, let's say you're studying biology or physics or whatever it might be, you are not going in and doing every single study. You are reading about people that did those studies, came up with those theories, and now that's most of what you know. How many people believe the world is round? Raise your hands. No flat earthers here? Okay, good, alhamdulillah, because they provide a challenge in the class, which is very problematic. So, okay, how do we know that?
Gravity.
The world is round because of gravity?
No, it's because of how gravity works. If the world were flat, then gravity wouldn't work.
Okay, how do you know that? Where did you learn that? You heard it from a cartoon. Okay. Testimonial knowledge, right? Even that. Okay. How do we know the world is round? NASA. Okay. You have to trust the kalam of NASA, right? Authority. Khalas.
So those, the challenge of flat earthers,
Right.
and some of their subtitles work,
Okay.
is that their sincere problem is they don't trust NASA and others as an entity to give that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's the issue of testimony, not trusting testimony. How many people, here's a challenge. Can anyone prove to me that the earth is round without testimony? The only way you know, okay, Bismillah. This is my favorite part of the class.
For example, if we take it as like the way that we have the day and night seasons and everything, so if we consider like if the world was flat and the world was flat, so I will say we wouldn't have the regular seasons. Like for example, if you take a ball and we would have like a light or something,
Sure.
and then with the day and night, so if it's flat, like everything will be like if it were half of the earth will be very light.
Sure.
And I wouldn't like it's super dark. But since it's round, we
Yep.
have a little bit off. Like if we put like for example, if this the light would be half the light, and it will have a little bit of like the side way will be like for example evening.
Okay.
And because if
So wait, let me stop you for a second. Let me stop you for a second. Is it possible that the earth could have just gone like ding, 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 like the sun just went around the earth? Is that possible? And give you the same phenomena? Really? How do you know that?
if it was that way,
No. How do you know that is my question. All of this that you just explained to me, it's great. Jazakallah khair. How do you know that? Where did you get that information?
like the way that everyone like
How did you get it that is directly related to your personal experience?
because we are living in the world and we see the day and night, we see the seasons.
Fair enough. Okay, so what I'm saying is I'm living in the world too. If I gave you an alternate explanation, it's your explanation versus my explanation. How do we know yours is right and mine isn't? How do we adjudicate between that?
Everyone have different views, that's why
So then it's just subjective, right? Until when?
views, so I'll say my view is like that, and then your view is different.
Khalas. But how do we adjudicate? How do we decide who's right? What in this case, what would be the only way to decide what's right?
So in this case, we will include science and experience.
You would have to include testimonial knowledge, just to give you the right answer.
We can just go and then request.
So that's my question. Have you gone and done the experiments? You as an individual.
If I wanted
Not if you wanted to. Have you done it?
to,
You have not, right? The only way you know that if we went and did it, is from the say-so of somebody else. You did not, because you have not done them yourself, right? Let me give you a different example, just to highlight this point. Because we're always in this kind of like, yes, we could do the experiment. The issue is, we have not done the experiment, right? A lot of times people say, well, you could go around the world. Okay, have you flown around the world? No. So, okay, but you do not know that. You know that because someone else told you, man, right? How many people believe your mother is your mother? Raise your hand. All of us, okay? Can you prove that without testimony?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yes, please.
DNA test.
I love when people say that. I love it. People are like, DNA test. Like, mashallah. Okay, have you done a DNA test? No, khalas, right there, done, finished, right? Even if you did a DNA, so let's say I'm in class, someone goes like, yeah, I did a DNA test. I was that smart guy that sent my blood out in the world to who knows who, right? I did it. Okay, how do you know what the interpretation of that DNA test is? Except by way of testimony, right? All I'm trying to say is that most of what you know comes from the say-so of others. And in the West, that's downplayed greatly because of the worldview that we're in, right? When you go to the science department or whatever, biology or physics or whatever it might be, there's no sort of talk about, well, how do we trust these sources? Because that talk doesn't exist in academia except with, let's say, peer-reviewed papers. But who's the peer? Who funded the study? Where did it come from? What was the motivation? You don't have that information. Sometimes you do. All right, so the cigarette company funded the study. I don't know about that one then. I'm not sure about that study, right?